Hey, John, I want you to come back to talk about a very important topic, essentially a domestic violence case that we see in court, which can lead to several different charges in the district court.
Hey Jay, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to talk about this issue. This is a very serious issue in the district courts and in superior courts, and something that we see a ton of. And I would tell you in my own personal practice in the last year and a half since the onset of the pandemic, it has gone through the roof. And so it's something that the courts take very seriously, the prosecution takes very seriously. And like I tell all of my clients, to me, there are two zero tolerance crimes in Massachusetts. One is drunk driving and the other is domestic violence. And so I only say that because those are cases that those will never get dismissed unless we put it on for trial. So we have to take those two kind of cases from beginning all the way to the end. Even in instances where people have a privilege, marital privilege or a Fifth Amendment privilege, those are trial rights, and most prosecutors will make that person assert on the day of trial. They won't do it at the pretrial stages anymore, which is something we used to see, 10, 15 years ago. You could get rid of that at a pretrial stage, but not really now.
No, that's a really important point, because I think people get mistaken the fact that the victim in the case, whether it's male or female, is the moving party, but it's not a civil case, right? So even if that person doesn't want, maybe they never even called the police, maybe a neighbor called the police, maybe they never wanted the criminal charges issued, or maybe they were the ones who calls police, but they have no authority over the case. Once police are called, it starts with the essentially prosecutor, and the prosecutor is the person with the authority to deal with the case and see what they want to do with it.
Right. So and a lot of times in those situations, it's a married couple or a dating relationship, and whatever happened. There was an incident. That's what I usually tell people. Look, there's an uncontroverted fact here that something took place, right? And then the police responded, and under the 209A law, somebody had to be placed under arrest. It was you. And so now the person who's the victim in the case, the complaining witness, oftentimes the next day, is in my office or on the phone with me telling me, I want to drop the charges. I'm going to drop the case, right? And I'd say, that's wonderful. That's not how it works, because it's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus so-and-so, not you versus so-and-so. You are the main witness for the Commonwealth, so the Commonwealth and the DA's office, who represents the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, they can't go forward in the end without the cooperation of that victim or witness, right? So, but that's a misnomer, right? People don't understand that, they just can't get rid of the case. And what I tell them a lot of times is, look, if you don't want anybody involved, then don't call the police next time. Don't you deal with it, right? Because now you're saying it's unfair that we have to go through this process. They had to respond, they had to arrest somebody, and they had to write a report, and they had to do all this work. So if it's not that big a deal, then don't call the police. But you're right. Sometimes it is a neighbor. It's a third party witness who sees something happening, who calls, and then you deal with it from there.
Yeah, and I think we've always given the same advice too. I mean, sometimes there would be a spouse or someone calls us and say, "What should we do?" I'm like, "Well, if your safety is in danger, you got to do what you got to do to make sure you're safe, including calling the police." So that's definitely a difficult situation. But I think the guidance and the advice here too is to realize that there's once you kind of get into a certain argument, there's nothing that you can do to kind of calm down that situation. A lot of times the best thing to do is just to walk away from it, right? Yeah. Take some time away and try to deal with it. There's really no reason why it should lead to a physical altercation. And if you think that your verbal arguments came to the point that you're both kind of stuck, just walk away for the night. Just go somewhere else. It's one of those things that you definitely need to de-escalate the situation before it gets worse. Especially a couple of years ago when they started really escalating these types of charges, including creating new charges such as domestic assault and battery on a family or household member, and including a specific strangulation statute that really was specific for domestic violence. So I think people aren't aware that essentially the results of these particular charges are so, encumbering in some ways, right? And it's so kind of difficult to deal with that they really need to work on the relationship at the front end to make sure that they avoid these situations at all costs.
Right. And now you touched on it there with the change in the law in the last, whatever, it's been 5 years or so.
That long already. Wow.
Yeah, right. With the onset of the just enhanced penalties, the enhanced strangulation suffocation charge. But what we see now a lot more than I ever saw before. Certainly as a prosecutor, I never even moved for 1 in 3 years. And that's a dangerousness hearing, right? And so, especially anytime you have the suffocation strangulation charge, it's automatic. Just about every county is going to file a 58A, and now that person's going to be held pending the hearing. And then once the hearing is had, they're at risk of being held without bail for 120 days, right? And so, and there's not much we can do in that. And that's a whole different conversation altogether. But in those points, it's hard to argue that your person's not dangerous, based on what the police report says. It's a matter of, can we let them out under strict conditions that it's going to ensure the safety of the victim? And so they take that very seriously, as well they should. And that's one of the charges now. You got to be pretty sure you can beat that going into trial, because if you're convicted, you're not walking out of that courtroom. You'll be walking out the back door in handcuffs.
Right. And also we'll definitely do a video on dangerousness hearings, but that 120 days is not a straight 120 days. Not every day that you sit in jail counts towards that. And that's
especially now with COVID, right? So, you're not getting credit for it.
That's correct. So, it's based on speedy trial rights, and that's a whole can of worms that we should really definitely talk about some more. But, in terms of the domestic violence cases too, when it comes to exchange students, and when it comes to people who are foreign nationals who may just be here on green cards too, not only are you going to have criminal issues, but you're going to have serious immigration issues, right? That can lead to deportation, denial of naturalization, denied entry to the United States. If you pick up a case and you leave the country, you better speak to an immigration lawyer, not us, right? Like an immigration expert, to really figure out if you can even leave the country, or if you're a target for ICE to come grab. That's not something that we can answer for you, but we always warn our clients, before you file anything, before you leave the country, you better talk to an expert to really figure out the analysis on those cases, because it is case and fact specific for immigration lawyer also.
Right. And they make no bones about it. They might be able to leave, but they're not coming back in. Right. And that's a big thing, especially when you're talking about college students here. So on student visas, they're not going to come back. You're not going to let them back in the country. So those issues, it puts us in a see, I don't mind being in that position, because there's not much of a, decision to be made. There's no plea bargain that we can really do, other than a pretrial probation, right? Because that involves no admission of wrongdoing. But in order to get that, it's got to be the perfect set of circumstances, because only the district attorney holds that power to offer someone pretrial probation. So short of that, it's all or nothing, right? That case is going to trial. You're going to have to try it, or it's going to get dismissed on the day of trial. And, that's only to protect the person from having the ability to stay in the country. So, like I said, for me, those are, as crazy as it sounds, sometimes easier to deal with, because there's no in between. You're just taking that all the way from the beginning.
Yeah. And that's the important thing. You need to be able to interact with people around you, especially your loved ones, in a way that the police aren't going to be called by the other individual or by a neighbor. Like, you just need to be an adult and really be able to get through that, because there's really no reason, no excuse for anyone to essentially have a physical altercation, especially with someone. Like, that's just, it's unexcusable.
No, it is. But what you've seen, and what we've seen in the spike since January, February of 2020, is that, the mental health issues have just gone through the roof. Right. Even more so, though, is substance use, right? That's just gone like wildfire. And so, you mix those two things, and being cooped up in the same house with people, everyday arguments are bound to turn physical. And that's where, we've really seen an increase in our own practice with domestic violence. I don't think I've ever dealt with this much domestic violence in my career. But it is all related, and so the best thing that I think that you and I are doing is, helping these people start off getting treatment right away, whether it is mental health or substance use. And sometimes it's both. But that helps as a mitigating factor going forward as we deal with the court process, because now there's more of an opportunity for, a resolution that might help everybody. And especially if that relationship is going to continue on, we feel some sense of security going forward that's probably not going to happen again.
Right. So, John, hopefully we don't get more calls about this, but it is pretty prevalent nowadays, and it is a difficult case to deal with when people are being charged with these crimes.
Right. You got it.